Greetings, fellow humans. I'm MartianBuu. Blizzard has announced the next Hearthstone year, Year of the Doggy. With the new Hearthstone year comes a brand new core set alongside the standard rotations, so everything from Year of the Griffin is rotating out. Today, I just wanted to cover the most exciting cards in the set, most notable things leaving and staying, and the changes that matter for Wild. One of the more interesting changes coming with the core set is updates to keywords. Tradable was introduced in Year of the Griffin and hasn't really been used much since, but that's all about to change. So, tradable is now going to be an evergreen keyword, which means we're going to see it all the time. We've already seen a couple upcoming tradable cards spoiled for Festival of Legends, and now we're going to see several of the tradables we've already become accustomed to return in the new standard core set. Maybe most notable is Rust-Rot Viper, which will be replacing Acidic Swamp Ooze as the generic core set weapon tech. In general, I do like the concept of tradable, and I'm happy to see more of it. I'd like to see a few more of the mechanics from over the years become evergreen, especially dual class. So overall, pretty exciting. We have a returning mechanic, so they didn't say that this one is evergreen, but we are seeing magnetic return to standard. So they're going to bring back Zilliax, which is a commonly requested core set card. So Zilly fans probably excited for that. They did say that they're bringing the magnetic back to core, but they did not say whether or not we're going to see any magnetic cards throughout the year. So we'll have to wait and see. And finally, for keywords, we have a brand new keyword in the core set, Overheal. So if you want the full explanation, I'm going to have the link to the core set update in the description. But the TLDR is they've been struggling to figure out what they want priest class identity to be, and the solution that they came up with is to stick with the healing identity and add a new keyword, Overheal, so that the healing hero power doesn't just feel like a worse armor up. The way that Overheal works is if a minion has Overheal and you heal it more than what would bring it to full health, that effect will trigger. So if a card has 3 health and it has 2 damage and you heal it with the priest hero power, the Overheal does not trigger. If it has 3 health and 1 damage and you heal it with the priest hero power, the effect will trigger. So that's a pretty significant core set update just with the keywords alone. Overall, however, the cards that they're changing are really powerful. It looks like they're trying to make the core set have a bunch of very strong playable cards in it, which if you like free cards is a good change. So there are a lot of cards leaving and entering the core set, and we'd be here for a while if I touched on all of them, so I'm just gonna go over the significant ones from my perspective. Earthen Scales is leaving the core set, and we haven't heard any word on this, but I would like to see it just on principle get reverted. My worry when they first announced the core set was that bringing back old wild cards to standard is going to open them up to getting nerfed for standard when they're fine in wild, which is what happened with Earthen Scales. Now that the card is leaving, I'm really hoping that they're going to unnerf it for the sake of wild. Honestly, it probably doesn't make much of a difference either way, but just on principle, I'd really like it if, now that this is rotating, we could get the change reverted. Speaking of cards I'd like to get reverted, Fiery War Axe is actually leaving the core set, which is a really good change because I think War Axe as a 3-mana 3/2 with no effect isn't a valuable card for players to have. It's not even a good basic card for players to fill out a deck. It just sucks. So getting that out of the core set and replacing it with more interesting weapons I think is a good idea. I'm really hoping that they revert it when they rotate it to wild, because this is a card that I have a lot of nostalgia for and I'd really like to play with. I don't know how good it's going to actually be in today's wild, but it'll be really fun to have it back. Rockbiter Weapon and Cold Blood are also rotating. Personally, I'd love to see reversions on those as well, but who knows what they'll actually do. There are a lot of interesting cards coming to this core set. Hunter is getting Dragonbane and Catrick. Mage is getting Stargazer Luna. Paladin is getting Lothraxian and Muster for Battle. Muster for Battle is pretty interesting to me. I remember Ixar saying that Muster is the card that got the closest to getting nerfed that never actually got nerfed, so it'll be interesting to see how that type of card performs in today's standard. Hand of Adal is returning to the core set, but it is not returning to the core set reverted. So this is the reason why I think we see some cards that are totally fine for wild power level not getting reverted when they rotate, is because they're the type of things that they consider to bring back for core later, and they don't want to like nerf, buff, nerf the cards every time that they want to just add it back to the core set. So if the card is the type of thing that they want to be able to consider in the future, even if it's totally fine for wild, I think that's why they don't revert everything. Priest is getting Dark Bishop Benedictus in the core set, which I think is really cool because Shadow Priest is so core thematically to Priest in World of Warcraft. And this is the first time that it's ever felt real. So like Shadow form never quite stuck, but Dark Bishop Benedictus actually made that archetype feel smooth and relevant. So yeah, big thumbs up on that one. Rogue is going to be the new third secret class. So Paladin is getting all of its secrets removed, and Rogue is having secret support added to core, which I think is 10 years overdue. It's always been funny to me that Paladins, which are supposed to be the straightforward and honest class, had secrets, and Rogue, which is the sneaky and stealthy class, doesn't have secrets. I know that they did give Rogue secrets eventually, but it's never been part of their core identity. So taking them away from Paladin, where it just didn't fit thematically, and giving it to Rogue, where it does fit thematically, makes a lot of sense to me. Not that secrets are a good mechanic. I'd love to see them do away with them entirely, but if we must have them, it makes more sense in Rogue. Shaman is getting totem support and overload support. Warlock is getting Defile back, which is another one that I feel like has been requested a lot. So longtime fans of Warlock will probably appreciate that. Another more notable thing is Mal'Ganis is coming to the core set, which means Standard gets the Mal'Ganis Jailer combo. Jailer gives your minions immune, and Mal'Ganis gives your hero immune. So once you've played Jailer and played Mal'Ganis, unless your opponent has a board-wide clear, they can't actually kill you. Standard is getting Void Color along with this, which will make it a little bit easier to get the Mal'Ganis out, and they do still have Tome Tampering, unlike Wild, who recently lost it due to a ban. So while this is probably easier to pull off in Standard than it is in Wild, given the lower power level of the format, Mal'Ganis Jailer is even more of a meme than Jailer both in Wild, so it'll be hard to tell how relevant that combo is going to be. It is still cute that it is available. Warrior is getting some stuff. So surprising no one, Bran is leaving core. That is one of the most requested cards to leave. He was pretty dominating last year and made a lot of battle cries pretty absurd in Standard. One of the cards I'm kind of sad to leave is Reno Jackson. I understand that they brought all the Explorers back as a set last year, and now they're having them all leave together. But I feel like Highlander as an archetype is pretty beloved by the player base overall, and having a Highlander card, whether it be Reno or other, is just nice to have in Standard for enthusiasts to play with, even if it's not so good. And if we look at last year in Standard, Reno was not good on his own, which is pretty surprising that Reno was in Standard for a full year and never had a relevant deck. I know that he did get experimented with a couple times, but none of those decks were actually good. In his place, however, we are getting Ragnaros the Firelord and Dr. Boom back. These are cards that saw a lot of play in their time, but the game has kind of gotten away from them since then. Singular bombs that don't completely end the game on their own, or completely swing the board state, just don't really do much anymore. So it is a little sad to see something like Reno go and get Ragnaros and Dr. Boom back when they won't really do anything. I could be wrong though, they could be the nuttiest bombs in Standard. We'll have to see. Eater of Secrets, everyone's favorite terrible tech card, is coming back to Standard, so it's nice that Standard players will now get to get baited just like the Wild players do, play their Eater of Secrets into Objection and do absolutely nothing, and otherwise be a 4-mana 2/4. The big one that I see everyone talking about returning to Standard is Dirty Rat. So Dirty Rat is the staple disruption tool of slower decks in Wild. Coming back to Standard, and I'm hearing a lot of sentiment of Standard had better not get Dirty Rat nerfed. And I'm thinking, why are they going to nerf this over anything else? So generally, it's always a worry, as I said before, that when they bring back a Wild card to Standard, that it's going to get nerfed, and Dirty Rat could get nerfed, but I just don't see it. Like, Dirty Rat is nowhere near on the level of a card like Theotar or Lucia, and Standard wants to have some disruption, I imagine. I'm not saying that Dirty Rat won't get nerfed by any means, but I do not see it as being more likely to get nerfed than any other good card that just gets brought back to the core set. So I feel like the Twitter response to this has been Dirty Rat is an outlier of the type of thing that might be getting nerfed, and I just don't see it. So yeah, it might, but I wouldn't be concerned for it over anything else that's relevant. All right, so now for some card adjustments. There have been a ton of cards that have been adjusted for the core set. What's significant about that, apart from just the cards in Wild will get better, is a lot of these are in Zephyrus's pool. So this core set is actually an enormous buff to Zephyrus. Soul of the Forest, Savannah Highmane, True Silver Champion, Consecration, Holy Nova, the Black Knight, and Fan of Knives are all in Zephyrus's pool, and they're all getting buffed. A lot of these cards I think are actually good. Savannah Highmane, True Silver Champion, I don't think that that's going to change anything. They're going to see as much play in Wild as they were before. But Consecration at 3 mana, for example, that's pretty nutty. Unlike Holy Nova, which when it lost a mana, lost its face damage, they are keeping it at dealing the damage to all enemies. It is only losing a mana. And between City Tax, Equality, Barov, and Consecrate, I feel like now that it costs 3, you could have a pretty reliable removal package in Paladin. Speaking of Holy Nova actually did get its damage back. So now it is going face again. I would have rather seen that lose another mana, but I guess still going face is cool. Hellfire is also losing a mana, so just clears overall are losing a mana to be more relevant. Hellfire at 3 seems pretty decent. Fan of Knives is crazy. So Fan of Knives is going to 2, so the combination with Prep now once again results in 0 mana, but Fan of Knives for 2 seems like a pretty good card. Another Zeph card that's getting buffed is Hex. So the nerf is getting reverted. Finally, after all these years, the most unjustified nerf of all time is getting undone. So it's cool to get Hex at 3 back. Some other notables are Draconid Operative, which is going to a 4 mana 4/5, which I think is a pretty significant buff. Grime Street Outfitter is going from a 1/1 to a 2/2. Not that hand buff Paladin is seeing a lot of play right now, but the reason that this is a bit of a controversial buff is because Crystology could tutor it before, back when it had 1 attack, and now it can't. As we saw with Banana Man and Salhet's Pride, the tempo on the card is more valuable than the tutor ability with the tutor card. So I think that this is just a buff, but considering that there are plenty of other 1 attack things to target with Crystology, so definitely value the more stats up front. Shadow Ascendant is becoming a 2 mana 2/3, which is actually pretty good. I think that effect is really good. It's just the card itself was undercosted and now it's got premium stats. Elven Minstrel getting an extra health is interesting. I don't know that it'll matter for Pillager-esque combo decks that much, considering they're not looking to get tempo as much as they're looking to find their pieces, but maybe this is enough to consider Elven Minstrel and Foxy Fraud in some other type of rogue deck. A lot of the magnetic cards that are coming back are getting buffed. So Replicating Menace is getting a health, War Gear is getting an attack, Bronze Gatekeeper is getting an attack, Royal Librarian is getting an attack. I don't know that any of those changes are going to make or break those cards. Too bad Taunt isn't really a thing anymore, because this is a pretty sweet buff to the Black Knight. Taunt just doesn't matter enough in Wild for me to think that the Black Knight is going to see any more play at its significantly buffed state here, but you never know. A theme we're seeing generally is a lot of 1/1s are becoming 1/2s. So Babbling Book, Psychic Conjurer, Swashbuckler, even Jeweled Macaw. The one of these that I think is the most likely to actually see some play is Psychic Conjurer. Reno Shadow Priests were experimenting with this card as a 1/1, and at 1/2 it now survives trading with patches and can't be as easily pinged off as it used to be. So it might be more interesting now. That's not a high confidence prediction. It could still be too mid to actually see competitive play at 2 health, but I do think that that change is significant, and the card was seeing some play before. Is Swashbuckler good enough for Pirate Rogue? Maybe. Random other class cards tend to be really, really bad, and Pirate Rogue wins so fast it doesn't really need any value, so it's hard to say for sure. I would imagine not. Something to note, a lot of these changes aren't strictly nerfs. A lot of them are deleting an old card and printing a new one in the new one's name. We saw them almost do this with Stone Tusk Boar and Bluegill a couple years ago when they first made the core set, and there was some player outrage, and they decided to print new cards, Red Scale and Emerald Sky Talent, in their place, and just rotate the Stone Tusk and Bluegill to Wild, thus preserving the old cards and still having the new one. So in this case, this is basically just priest cards. We have Holy Champion, Katrina Muerte, and Crimson Clergy. These cards do not work like they used to. These are new cards, somewhat resembling the old ones. For the most part, these are buffs. I would say that This type of thing bothers me on principle, but as far as the cards that actually got targeted, who cares? None of those cards were any good. Mana Geode as well. They are being repurposed to have a potential new effect. So based on the ones that they chose, I have no issue. However, on principle, the concept of my cards might get deleted and new cards will happen with their picture and name bothers me a little bit. In the case of Katrina Muerte, I don't know how much of a buff this is. She is losing a mana, which is good, but she only targets undead now. I imagine that's a buff because then you can include things for the early turns. You can have like various clerics or whatever to play early and still only revive your powerful undead minions. But we'll have to see what kind of undead things there are to res. Holy Champion is getting overheal, gain +2 attack, and it is becoming a 2 mana 1/4. I believe that was a 4 mana 3/5 before. So that is an enormous change. How good is the overheal on that? I'm not sure. You have to overheal it once for it to be a totem golem, and then it starts to get a little bit better once you've invested healing in it twice. So it seems like it's not going to be that great. The real strong one is Crimson Clergy, and this one is actually pretty worrisome. It seems like a really strong card just as it is. So it's a 1 mana 1/3 overheal, draw a card. So you can play it on 1, and then on 2 you can heal it to draw a card. Seems totally fine for standard. Seems like a nice alternative to Northshire Cleric, which is now rotating. However, in Wild, I forgot to mention Radiant Elemental is actually leaving the core set, so standard does not have that anymore, but Wild still does. And now you can get out a Crimson Clergy and a Radiant Elemental, then draw your entire deck. Especially if you can get out multiple clergies. I think Corbett was the first person to spot this, but there are so many cards like Renew, Rejuvenate, Gift of the Naru, Light of the Naru, Flash Heal, Circle of Healing. There are a ton of things, and in the case of Gift and Circle, if you have out a couple of clergy, you're drawing 2 per card. So it's going to be really easy to draw through your whole deck, get out some cheap Grave Horrors and Arcane Giants, or there are a couple of potential OTKs with Fizzle and the new Overheal card coming in Festival of Legends. So I think that this is pretty worrisome for Wild, and I don't know what change I would make to this. Maybe Radiant Elemental will get the Sork treatment. Who knows? Maybe it won't be that good and it won't need to be changed. Maybe they'll just leave it alone to torment us for a year. Who knows how it's going to go down. But I do think Crimson Clergy should definitely be on the watch list. Another interesting change is Ancestral Knowledge. So this was Overload 2. It is now Overload 1. Overload tends to kill a card for decks that don't care about overloading. So not going to 0 overload means I don't think most decks are going to run this that don't care about overload, but who knows, we could see it in decks like Shudder Shaman moving forward. The big debate is this a nerf or a buff for Frog Shaman? Frog Shaman is the deck that wants to draw its whole deck, overload a ton, and then overdraft to deal a bunch of damage to the opponent. On the one hand, you want to stack as much overload as you can in order to kill the opponent. On the other hand, the Ancestral Knowledge is the type of card that you want to play on 2 in order to have enough pieces to go off with your frog on 3 or 4. It could be that, so while this is a nerf to the kill turn, it might be a buff to the deck overall because it'll allow you to play the Spell Damage Dagger or Ice Fishing on 3 after having played this on 2. Who knows? It also lets you play this on 3 and still go off with your frog on 4, if that's how the game plays out. So at first I was like, this is definitely a nerf. What are you guys talking about? To that deck specifically. But I've warmed up to the idea that it's a buff for that deck. You definitely want as much overload as you could possibly have on your combo cards like Lightning Bolt. So if Lightning Bolt randomly got 2 more overload, that'd be a huge buff to the deck. The fact that it's the draw card that's getting its overload reduced specifically, I'm a little more open to the fact that it might be a buff. Finally, we have Shadow Step. Shadow Step is staying on in the core set, and the reason I bring it up is because a lot of people are saying Shadow Step is the reason Rogue is so broken all the time, and a lot of people are saying Shadow Step is super core to the Rogue identity, and it's the type of card you need to keep on all the time because it's not really Rogue without it. I gotta say, I think both arguments are kind of silly. So on the one hand, you look at Rogue from the past year and it's had a lot of broken stuff, but it's also had a lot of nerfs. Miracle Rogue had Sinstone Graveyard nerfed first by a mana, and then it doesn't have stealth anymore. Draka went to 5 mana. The whole interaction between Null and Maestra was deleted. These are really significant changes, and Miracle Rogue is still a very powerful deck in standard. If we undid all of those nerfs and remove Shadow Step instead, do we really think that that deck stops being a deck? I don't think that Shadow Step is worth all of those changes. I think really what we're looking at is Rogue has received 1 mana, draw a card every expansion last year, a ton of synergies with Cycle and playing multiple cards in a turn, as well as a bunch of ways to make cards cost 0. Is Shadow Step the singular card making Rogue oppressive? And I'm not saying that Shadow Step wasn't an option to help tame down that archetype. I just don't think that Shadow Step is the linchpin that keeps Rogue being oppressive. It's just, it got a really good package last year. On the other side, the argument that Rogue needs Shadow Step to be Rogue, I think is also very silly. No class is 1 card, and if that were true, Warrior would have never lost Fiery War Axe. Rogue has a mechanic of bouncing, and that can be Shadow Step, but we're also getting a bunch of other bouncing effects this year, as well as Rogue has been getting bouncing effects this whole time. Shadow Step represents the first in a long string of Rogue returns its minions back to hand to play them again. And I'm not saying that Shadow Step can't be around all the time. I'm saying it doesn't have to be. Rogue will still be Rogue without Shadow Step. And while the other balance cards aren't Shadow Step necessarily, they all are kind of part of the Rogue bounce package. So overall, my opinion is Shadow Step staying in core set is not notable. And if it had left the core set, that would have been fine. So that was the Martian highlights of the Year of the Doggy core set reveal. Let me know in the comments what you're excited about, what you wish was added to core, what you wish was removed from core. Remember to like and subscribe to support the channel. I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you so much for watching.